Welcome into another edition of Huber and Friends. I'm Jeremy Huber, joined today by our guest, Pam Chvotkin. Pam, of course, may have heard the name. Obviously, you've heard the name of her father, but Pam, a huge behind-the-scenes force when it comes to the world of broadcasting, sports marketing, event communications, professional, and professors, what she has up on her LinkedIn page. But she does so much. Pam, thank you for taking some time and joining Huber and Friends.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
So, usually I start these things off with, how did we meet? And we've met before, but not really, kind of, I think some American University games, some different things like that, seeing each other. And obviously you're a person that when said, oh, who's that? Because of the red hair, someone always noticed you. And also folks would say, okay, that's Rich Chvotkin's daughter. The reason I think we had some conversations back then weren't necessarily because of your dad, because I didn't really know him yet. I wasn't working with Georgetown. One of the reasons I actually was able to kind of strike up a conversation, your friend Jessica Clements.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
I saw pictures one day. So she was actually a good friend of the wife of one of my really good friends from back in the day. So a couple times I know I went up to you and I was like, oh, I saw some picture of you on Facebook, and go, oh yeah, I know her very well. So that, I think, were our original discussions, were having this kind of mutual friend.
That's so fun. Yeah, Jessica's great. It's awesome.
So again, that's kind of how I first kind of at least broke a little bit of an ice with you. But wanted to get into your career, and obviously it's a fun one, and it's one that I know from talking and seeing things, just all the different pictures of the different things you do, and you go, man, she's here, she's there. It's great. Let's start back here. You've said it before in interviews I've heard of you do, being from a sports family. Obviously your dad calling Georgetown games, but your brothers got into the sports business. What was it like to be in a family where sports was a big deal?
It was kind of just something that was second nature to all of us. There was always sports on television or some type of infused team oriented something. I did musical theater growing up, and I always had sort of a sports focus in that. And trying to navigate the theater world kind of translates into working along with teams. And I didn't do any sports in high school outside of cheerleading, dance team, that kind of thing. But it was always something that was around all the time. So I didn't think that there was anything else besides that, if that makes sense. There was the world that I was in, that my dad was traveling all the time, and it just was something that he just did. And it, again, became such a second nature thing that, like, the holidays were not really something that we just all did as a collective family, because the holidays were always sports oriented. There was always a game on, there was always something to watch. So, the dinners became dinners with, in front of the television, that kind of thing. And I love that. I thought that was something that was our little personal family tradition that not a lot of other families did. My spring breaks were spent up in New York at Madison Square Garden, which, looking back on that now, like, that's the coolest thing in the entire world. But back then people were like, oh, you're going up to New York again? You're going to another game again? You don't want to go anywhere else? And I'm just thinking to myself, not really. It's what I've always done. So, having been conditioned for so long, it kind of took me into the progression of what I wanted, looking at colleges, and ultimately settled on the University of Tennessee, which has the most spirit in the entire world. And I just felt very comfortable being around that atmosphere because, again, I grew up around being conditioned, going to games all the time, and seeing that camaraderie from teams and the spirit involved. And back in the late 80s, early 90s, I mean, Georgetown was awesome. The Big East was so great back then, that you can't help but want to be a part of that, or part of that culture of spirit, and getting involved and wanting to be just at the games for that environment, that atmosphere. You want that to continue throughout your life, and ultimately I chose that as a career. So
before we get into Tennessee, because I want to ask one more about your dad, but not necessarily about Rich, as a lot of people know his story. I interviewed him for 2 hours once, I think, during the pandemic. So I've got the Rich Chvotkin story. But did you learn early on, as you've kind of talked about how your career has been through networking and meeting people and kind of being nice to people and continuing to build relationships? Did you learn a little bit of that when you were going to games when your dad might be doing it and he goes, "Hey, here's my daughter Pam," where you kind of get to meet these people, you kind of want to at least be nice to them and kind of keep that relationship going. Did you kind of learn any lessons on networking as a younger kid?
Oh, 100%. And something that was interesting, and I still carry that through, and I still think that's one of the greatest lessons in networking for the any career really is my dad would talk to everybody, not just the people that he knew, but the people that he might have seen in passing, security guards, policemen, facilities management. And that I found ultimately through going through behind the scenes, those are the people that are going to really take care of you at the end of the day, especially going into a building like Cap One Arena or wherever you're at, working and getting to know the security guards, getting to know the people that you see all the time. A lot of people would just not necessarily acknowledge them or just dismiss them necessarily, but he would always say hello, how are you? He would listen, he would follow up on the people that would just be in front of them all the time. How's your family? What's new? And actually be interested in it, instead of just like a hey, how are you? What's up? And I found that to be incredibly important in any networking skill. And I learned that very, very young because my dad would do that all the time. And even with people that he didn't know, he would always introduce himself, or, you could ask him about any restaurant he'd been to on the road and be like, oh, yeah, go see my guy Sal up at that. I'm like, how do you even know who this person is? And he's like, yeah, I was there like 3 times that week. And you just, you build a rapport with people over time. And I think that that is something that I've learned and I've kept with.
You Everyone kind of, I guess, puts you with your dad, but your mom obviously played an important role as well. And it's funny, Pam, we're friends on Facebook. So occasionally I'll see a picture of your mom, and I think I've seen a couple of her, and they're literally some of the same poses that you do that she's in. I actually have a picture right here of her, I believe,
Oh,
doing
yeah.
some musical theater back in the day. What type of influence did she have on this great personality? I think everyone I always talk to just loves you. Did you get some of that from her, of just being that type of gregarious person?
100%. I learned everything I know from her. She is also somebody that knew how to converse well with people. She was a people person. My dad's a people person. And again, working behind the scenes, you got to deal with just a lot of people at once. And, I got that musical theater bug from her because she did that all through high school, college, what have you. Even now, she still does community theater. And it's just that opportunity to be not necessarily yourself, but be somebody else who, has this persona of just everything is great, everything is awesome. That positive mindset is really, really important, especially these days. Things can get negative as we get older, things can get frustrating or what have you. I just moved, and so that's a really stressful thing when you're dealing with work and family, and getting to the holiday season that we're almost at, that becomes stressful with traveling all the time and dealing with these careers that we have that are really high pressure environments, and getting that mindset of just like pushing through and again staying positive, listening to music. You have that personality that there are a lot of curmudgeons too in our business, and I always think it's important to try to double that fun personality and be as positive as possible, because why wouldn't you, right? Why wouldn't you want to have that mindset of just being happy all the time, because that's what I want. So I got a lot of that from her, and I'm grateful for it. So I'm glad that it resonates in photos and other people can see it too.
I was watching or listening to one of the podcasts you've previously done. You told an interesting story about why you picked Tennessee, and I think it had some brotherly influence, possibly.
It had a little bit of influence. My oldest brother went to the University of Arkansas, and he worked with the basketball team over there. My other brother went to University of Texas. He worked with the basketball team over there. So they both kind of branched away from East Coast and Maryland. They kind of both each went south. And, again, being around college basketball was kind of a no-brainer. They were both ended up being head managers of their teams in college. And when I was looking at school, I know I wanted to go south, but I wasn't really sure where just yet. I knew I didn't want to go to Arkansas because I was already the daughter of somebody. I didn't also want to be a brother of sister of somebody. And it wasn't in my mindset to like follow in the footsteps. My mom went to grad school at Florida. She wasn't the biggest fan. So I said, all right, well, no to Florida. My mom's originally from Athens, Georgia. And I was like, all right, well, I'm not going to go to Georgia. I still have family there. So it was one of those things where I was like, I don't want anyone to be following me around and telling my parents what I've been up to. I don't want any of that. And so I ended up just taking a dart one day and putting out all the SEC schools, throwing a dart, and actually became closest between Alabama and Tennessee. And I went to go visit Alabama, and I loved it. I thought the campus was awesome. Everything was great. It was a little too far for me being from DC. And so I went to go visit Knoxville, loved it. It was a lot smaller than a lot of other SEC schools. And it was within a day's drive. And the second I stepped foot on campus, I got this feeling that I didn't really get at the other schools I had visited. And I looked at all the way West Coast. I looked at UCLA. I looked at Boston University. I went all over to kind of see where I thought I would fit best. And I really felt home in Knoxville. And I went with Tennessee, and it was a great decision.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but you were thinking at the time when you went down there, you might want to do work in front of the camera, and then things changed?
I did. Well, being in musical theater, you're in front of the stage, you're on camera. I was comfortable on camera. And I got down to Knoxville, and it was pouring rain. I'll never forget it. And the beautiful girls with the pearls and the hair, everything stereotypical you could think of a northern girl going south and all that, what have you. It was pouring rain sideways. I'm wearing a jersey, I think. My hair is in a bun, trying to go up this hill up to this, where these classes are. And these girls were the most beautiful girls I'd ever seen in my entire life. What are you majoring in? Broadcast journalism. So I thought to myself, well, that's probably, I looked down, I looked up, and I was like, well, it's probably, maybe I should think about other options. Because I still really wanted to do it. I wanted to be involved in some facet, but I really wasn't sure, because at the time I saw, there was Erin Andrews, and there was just a few people, Andrea Kramer and Doris Burke. There were just a few women that, I knew of that were sideline reporters, right? There weren't any, I knew about Leslie Visser, but aspiring to be that was like, far, far, far away. I knew I had to build some type of career. I had to pay my dues and what have you, but there wasn't really anyone to look up to on the production side, because it wasn't promoted that way. So, I didn't really think that there was a potentially other option for women in sports. It was not easy to do that. It was 1,000 other people trying to vie for the same position. And I knew that would be really, really difficult. But ultimately, when I got to Knoxville, I got involved with Bud Ford, who was the AD at the time, at the athletic department. And I said, I just want to be involved. I don't really care what I do, because I don't really know yet what I want to do. And he gave me a bunch of envelopes and a bunch of calendars, and he goes, stuff away, girl. And it was just stuffing pamphlets for fans for the orange and white game. And I kind of got involved with behind the scenes on the marketing side with games. And I found I was like, wait, I can do this. And I don't have to be, I don't have to put on all this makeup, and I don't have to wear a dress. I don't have to do all these things, but I can still get that same rush, that same feeling I did on stage that I really enjoyed. I really liked that, drive of energy. And I got that same feeling being on stage. And that's another one of my favorite pictures. I'd paint my face for every single football game, basketball game. And this was before Bruce Pearl came, and we would just walk in at 7:00 right when the games start and be able to, walk down to courtside. And we kind of created this culture with this group called Orange Nation that would just show up to games every single week in a certain section, paint our faces, go nuts, go crazy. You know, everyone was wearing the same t-shirts and all the things, and just made it, you know, this persona that I could play as, you know, being in theater, do the same thing, you know, at games. But I also got a chance to see the inside, the behind the scenes of how games were run. And I really liked that. I really liked that behind the scenes feeling of being able to help create something that was so awesome that I really enjoyed as a fan. I thought, okay, well, I'm like the diehard fan. So how could I take what I know and what I learned growing up and seeing it from a different side? Because, you know, I didn't grow up around SEC football or any real collegiate football. We had college basketball. So I knew that.
Yep.
But I didn't know college football or anything about that culture. And I really wanted to learn all about it. And I definitely got an education.
Before we jump ahead into your job, I have to point something out. I went to college at Hampden-Sydney College. It's in the same town as Longwood. And I played football down there, and I had friends who grew up with me in Leesburg, just, you know, west of Dulles Airport. Same thing happened. They went to one of my games, and everyone dresses up. And they couldn't believe that they're in their jeans and sweatshirts. Like, what is this? What is this culture that does this? It's that Mason-Dixon line mindset. I think of anybody from DC North doesn't get it, and they never will.
And then they'll go down and see that and be like, that's crazy, but also kind of awesome. And I kind of want to be involved with it, but I don't know. And it's just one of those things where like you can't get away from it. So my theory is if you can't beat them, join them. And that was just, you know, that was worth every penny and a lot of acrylic paint years later.
Out of the college years, what were you kind of looking to do after you left Tennessee, and how did you find your way into the medium you're doing now?
Well, I knew I wanted to stay behind the scenes. I felt very comfortable there. I worked in athletics for a little while. When I got back to Maryland, I thought I had wanted to go potentially with the network. I was looking up at ESPN. I'd done a bunch of interviews, and an opportunity kind of came up during a Georgetown game. Actually, it was around winter break, I think it was. And I had gone to the games early with my dad forever. And one of the timeout coordinators during one of the broadcasts, this is when ESPN had the rights to the Big East at the time, had gotten stuck in traffic and they weren't going to be able to make it. And I kind of more or less just volunteered. I said, I don't have any idea what that position is, but if you're desperate, you know, as a producer running around, like freaking out. And I'm like, I was like, if you want to, I'm a fast learner. I know the game. I know when the timeouts are, but like, other than that, I have no clue about anything else. So if you want to teach me, I'm here. I'm a body to learn. And they said, absolutely. All right, let's go. No worries. You're already here. What might as well. And that was my first introduction to production truck and to see. And it was one of those things where I walked in and it was so overwhelmingly awesome where you see all the 15,000 TVs and they're just all the lit up buttons and everything. And I had no idea about this world. And I knew again about the game and I saw what I knew about, but this was a whole nother branch, this whole nother element that just, and not even in my wildest dream would I thought that I would even learn about. So that was something that was really awesome, really cool. And I was like, oh, this is something, they need people like this. They need this side of things to be able to make these games run, you know, much like on the theater side, you have your crew that deals with all the lighting and, you know, the audio. Without that crew, it's a dark stage. And that's kind of how I equate, you know, games to be, is that without this behind the scenes crew that sometimes goes unacknowledged, that you won't be able to see anything. So that's something that after that one game, I was kind of hooked and I wanted to know more. And I said, oh, well, if you're ever in the area again and you need somebody, if, you know, there's another position that you might think I'd be a better fit for or anything else, here's my email address and give me a call. And, you know, back then, and I'm aging myself, you couldn't just, you know, send them a message on LinkedIn, you couldn't just call on the phone, but it was something that I said, if you're ever in town, let me know. And I ended up getting a phone call and got asked to do a high school all-star basketball game. This was at, oh gosh, this was at Bullis, I think it was.
Mm-hmm.
And it was something that ESPN was producing. They were doing a 3-game show. And that was my real first taste into production. All the people that were working there happened to be based in Charlotte because ESPN Regional was covering all the collegiate athletics and high school sports out of the Charlotte office at the time. And I met everyone from there. And I said, I think I would love to work with ESPN full time. Do I need to be moving? Do I need to be in Bristol? Like, what do I need to do this? And I kind of just kept in touch. And one of the crew members that was on that event was a local crewer in DC who was a camera guy. And I got hooked up with him, and I have been working with him ever since on shows, gigs, what have you. So I've been really fortunate that the timing worked out where I happened to be right place, right time, and the guy happened to be stuck in traffic, and the rest is kind of history.
Yeah, it's crazy, but everyone has that crazy story. I feel like in this business where, you could have been that day and said, Dad, I don't want to go to the game today. I have some friends. I'm going to go get some beers with them. And instead you go to the game and it basically starts your career. When did you start kind of branching out away from ESPN and other folks either taking notice of you or you getting your kind of vibe out there and letting people know that you could kind of help them out as well, other networks?
Well, again, working with the local crewer, the networks would reach out to him and ask, "Hey, I need people to do this event, or we're coming into town for this." And kind of proving myself over a couple of games. You see the work ethic. You see how people are hungry and involved. He saw that in me, which is great. I kept in touch with him, followed up with him. And that's part of the networking thing too. After you meet somebody, you have to go through that motion of curating that relationship and following up over time. And even if things get slow or quiet, you could say, "Hey, what's new? Have you heard anything? What's going on?" And then you get across and you meet the people from the networks. And then I end up reaching out to them specifically and say, "Hey, instead of, you could reach out to me, you could go through the crew, you could send your other guys to, here's my number and information. Call me. I'm in the DC area. I want to do this. I want to branch out to do other things. Anytime you want, let me know." And so that was something that I just kept building over time. And instead of going through the crewers through certain networks, they ended up just calling me directly. They would ask me for recommendations. Do you know any utilities that might be good for this? Or they have friends that, this business is really, really small. And a lot of people, especially in collegiate athletics that I learned, they all move laterally sometimes. So they'll do the similar position in a different network or a different school. And you just keep building your network kind of from there. And, you just get this reputation that you produce good work and you have a good attitude, especially when you're around people for 13, 14, 15-hour days. There's people that this is a lifestyle that we all are dealing with. It's not for everybody. There's a lot of sacrifice involved, giving up a lot of the weekends and the travel aspect. But once you can kind of get that under your belt and realize that that's what you want to do, you build this reputation that people want to continue because you do great work. And my mindset is, I want to eventually get into a room where I don't have to introduce myself. That is like my ultimate goal in life, where like if I'm in, some media center, media room, I don't have to introduce who I am because everybody knows me. That's kind of my mindset, that I've worked enough with the different roles and responsibilities that's something that's, I think, a great goal to aspire to.
Pam, in looking at your stuff, your resume, it feels like you still do a lot of different things. Has it leveled out? Are you still the person that can put on 5 or 6 different hats and master each of those jobs?
Not necessarily 5 or 6, more like 12 or 13. I think that over time they're like, "Oh, great, you can do this. Well, what else can you do?" There's a lot of juggling involved. There's a lot of that. But yeah, I feel like I don't want to settle. I've done certain events and I'm grateful for them. I've been able to do multiple events of the same thing. I've done, Super Bowls and I've done World Series, but each show is a little bit different. You're always in a different environment. There's always new challenges. And I like that opportunity for the challenge. And there's just a lot that I haven't feel like I've done yet. I've done a lot. But there's still things I want to accomplish. There's still bucket list items, just like, anybody else that wants to keep going. And, while I'm still young, while I still can, and while I'm still allowed to, I still want to keep going and check off those bucket list items.
Yeah, just looking, I mean, you've done it, and forgive me, I'm the idiot talent, so I don't know, but you're doing stuff in booth, you're doing stuff in truck, you're doing, one thing that kind of struck me in some of the doing some research on you is, you're ordering food for people and making sure that all works, not that you're getting the food, you're the person who has to make sure this all gets coordinated at the same time. I mean, to me, the varied skill set that you seemingly bring to the table and doing it with a smile on your face. That's the thing for me. I feel sometimes that, I get in this spot of this is what I want to do. And if you ask me to do something else, I don't really want to do that. You're kind of just saying, hey, take it on. I'm ready. I'll go ahead and do that. And I guess that has to kind of make it fun in a sense of it's always something different, right?
100%. And a great example of that is dealing with these higher end jewel events, what we like to call them. And there's working with an event like the Super Bowl, you've got your one big game, but there's so many things that lead up to that week that I think is the most fun. You've got all your shows, you've got all the buildup, you've got these parties, you've got events, and then once the game happens, you're like, all right, the game's here, great. But when you deal with the other championship events like the NBA and the NHL and baseball, you're dealing with 7-game series. Then you don't know how long they're going. You have to travel back and forth. You're in an area that you're not necessarily familiar with, or if you are and you haven't been there in a while, things change. That great restaurant that you used 3 years ago might not necessarily be there, or again, there's those challenges. That are a lot of fun, but like you said, can be really, really, really stressful. When you're dealing with people, usually 300 people in a crew at one time, you're at a stress level that you just want to make sure that these guys are getting fed in the small window of time that you have, and it's a lot different when you're in a place like Knoxville or Tuscaloosa versus a place like LA or New York, where
Sure.
you're fighting against not only people and time, but traffic and weather and all these other things, in a crazy city like that. Just dealing with the World Series and the Yankees, you're dealing with, 15 other things completely out of your control, still trying to make sure that you have, food at the right time for your crew, because you want to make sure that they're taken care of. They're the ones that are ultimately helping to produce the game that you're supporting. And you just, at the end of the day, you don't know how this is gonna go. I always joke around that for 7-game series, I always want each team to win one game so that we know we're going back for 5, so I can plan for 5 games. But when a team goes up 3-0, you don't know, is it going to end in 4? Is it going to go 5? We had every intention on the Fox side for the World Series to travel back to LA for game 6. We had our whole crew of 275 plus people prepared, right, with all the people that were working on the operations side to make sure that this charter was going to land back in LA. Food was going to be available when they landed. We had all the game menus prepared. We had all the shipping ready to go. But you're dealing with, again, 2 completely different scenarios in a clench situation where we still had to ship things back to different locations. You have 15 or 16 different vendors with lighting and all the parabs and the walkie-talkies, all those types of equipment that had to go somewhere once the game ended. And there's just a lot of coordination that goes on with that. So having somebody who has a lot of patience, and you can only be positive for so long before you just want to completely rip your hair out. But that's kind of like the fun of it, right? Like you don't want to see, I think blowouts are boring. We want to see the buzzer beaters. We want to see those close games because there's a way more fun. But when you think about the logistics behind it, you're dealing with 2 teams in a championship situation that have to plan way in advance. LA had to plan for this parade that happened in 2 days. New York had to do the same thing, whether it happened or not. There are people that have to plan all these situations and the what ifs and the, what have yous. I like to say that people that work in sports production put wedding planners to shame, because we do that every single weekend. Travel coordinators are the best. I would never want to do that, because when you're dealing with hurricanes and cancellations and moving people and transferring 300 people from flights to another, I mean, that overwhelms you just talking about it, let alone doing it. But you learn over time what works and what doesn't work. You try to get ahead of it as much as you can with what, knowledge that you have to work with that, and, hope and pray that your caterer shows up on time. And that's my thing, is I'll wake up in the middle of the night thinking that my catering order got canceled. And like, that's those are a lot of the stressors that I'll have on a day-to-day basis. But there's always some solution, right? There's always, again, the benefit of being in a place like New York, LA. There's places that are open till 4 a.m. So there's always options. It's just figuring out those resources and knowing who to call and saying, hey, I need a favor. Do you know anyone who does XYZ? And if worst comes to worst, then I'll go buy a griddle and a bunch of groceries and I'll just cook it myself, because that's just what we do. So,
Pam, you mentioned some of the huge events that you've done. I think I heard that you've done all of the Big Four championships. What was the first pinch yourself moment? I ask this all the time with broadcasters. That's that moment of, oh crap, like this is a really big deal. What was the first one of those for you?
My first Final Four, that was something that was just like, I had been wanting to do that for a long time. Again, just being and growing up around college basketball, I knew that it was an event that I wanted to work. And I had started with CBS. The first big event that I did with them was Army Navy in Baltimore. And even then, I had really no connection to Army or Navy in terms of the schools, but like I knew it was a big event. But that same crew ended up doing the Final Four that year, and I got lucky enough to get on that traveling crew with them. And that was just something that was such a cool moment, full circle for me. That, having been able to see that for so many years, and, being on the regional side, you don't necessarily get to see the craziness that comes with the finality of a bracket like that. But getting to do that whole event, that was really, really cool. That was something that was, gosh, it's been just wrapped my 9th or 10th Final Four. So being able to do that, none of those events get old for me. I still think that those are just, it's one of those things where you show up on site, it's an empty stadium or arena, and you just kind of look around and just soak it in and just be like, yeah, this is cool. This is really awesome.
Another thing that you've talked about a lot, heck, it's in your Twitter bio, is storyteller, where, obviously the game's going to be the game and things are going to happen, but obviously there's kind of things you're looking to hit throughout the game, storylines you're trying to get, but also having to adjust to those. Why do you think storytelling is so important when you're coming at it, when you're talking about broadcasting games?
I just think that everyone wants to explain it in a different way. You'll see, especially, I like to use this example in college basketball, because you see that a little bit more from an intimate standpoint. Different directors will have different choices, and there's always a production meeting. There's always the what you talk about, the storylines of the day, where you're going in and we're like, all right, here's what we know, right? We know that statistically, this team has done really, really well. In these pressure situations, you look like a Tom Izzo in Michigan State. You never want to bet against Michigan State in March. Just statistically, they've just always known to do really, really well, regardless if the team is good or not. Like, you just don't. I always just knew never bet against a team like Michigan State. But, you look at some of the directors and, if there's a buzzer beater situation, especially during the NCAA tournament, you'll see two styles of storytelling. You'll see a director that'll choose to focus on the team that wins with the jubilation and the excitement and the cheering and the fans. And then you'll see some directors that choose to look at the player who's defeated on the sidelines and he's crying with a head in his, his hands in his head. And you'll be like, oh, this is what, statistically it tells us this. So here's what we're going to focus on. But how the game is going to go, no one really knows. And that's kind of the fun of it, is we can only describe visually what we see being there in person, and how we're going to have that translate to what the viewers see at home. And the idea is for the viewers at home to be able to experience as close to what we see being there in person. And that's our version of storytelling. And I think certain producers and directors have their own style. Again, a program like College Game Day, which really hits on the emotional side of sports. They have a really great program and series that would just focus on these really important stories that make us have a connection to the teams or connection to the game in some way. But I think storytelling is really important. We see that with the Olympics all the time, where I'm like, I have no idea what this trap shooting kind of game is, but we're going to learn all about the history and how this Olympian came to be and their storyline behind it. And you're like, oh, well, this is awesome. They, went through years of adversity to get here, and now they're Olympic champion and athlete. And so we get kind of addicted to these stories because of the way that they're told. And being on the production side and being able to produce these styles of games, you learn different styles and how people want to express, how you're watching games, because they're not all the same. Every team is different. Every story is different. Who deserves this more? Well, both teams in, most ways deserve it. But, again, looking at a series like, the World Series, there are so many great storylines for so many reasons. And it just kind of depends on what your personal rooting interest in, but there's a lot of things to cheer for, and looking at statistics and all those things can always find some type of story to tell.
You've been so busy in your career, but 2020, everything shuts down. It's actually funny looking back. I think we were both at the CAA tournament. You obviously were doing a lot more than I was, but I did talk to both coaches. So when one of the referees got COVID and handshake lines and stuff, I remember, and actually this was at Sirius XM, Pam, I actually was in my car when that news came out, and Dan Lang, who I think you may know over Voice of American, he actually was working. I had to call him. He had to run down to HR to figure all this out and not let me in the building and say, stay away for the next 10 days. Obviously, your story is a little more layered than that, because you went up to the Big East when everything kind of became ground zero for that. Kind of tell me about that whole experience for you. And also, did it get dark for you because all the work that you depend on kind of went by the wayside?
Oh, it absolutely got dark. I did not work for 4 months. That was a whole new experience that I just never expected. That just would. I didn't think that sports would stop. I thought maybe they would just not have fans there, and they would still be able to have some type of production of games or events, and then that just stopped. But doing that CAA tournament, everything was fine until it wasn't fine. And I had gone up to the Big East tournament right after that. I think I had hopped on a train literally the next morning. And then we all on the CBS side got calls from the assistant commissioner, the CIA, to kind of let us know prior to the press release coming out that said, hey, if you're around people. And I'm like, well, it's a little late for that, considering, dad, brother, all those people. But the games, as far as we knew, that Wednesday was, and we had been hearing things. The SEC championship, I think, was still going on at the time. I think that was the last shoe to drop. But we were watching the Creighton game, and then we just got word at halftime. All right, that's it.
Yep.
You're done. Everybody leave. And we're just kind of like, what? And you just have no idea what that's like, because it wasn't a joke, but it was kind of like a whole surreal moment. And I'll never forget walking out of the Garden back to the hotel, and you just saw the buses around the backside of MSG, and there was just players just walking, at halftime. Just the weirdest thing. And everyone's like, I don't feel any symptoms. I don't feel sick, but like, and I said, all right, well, I have to go home. Once I heard from the assistant commissioner, I got on a train, got home, went to go get groceries, because I'm thinking, all right, I haven't been home for like 2 weeks anyway. Let me just get a bunch of stuff anyway. And I luckily, knock on wood, never got sick, but slowly but surely after getting home and things got canceled, I just got emails, postpone, postpone, cancel, canceled. It was just a barrage of just emails that just didn't stop. And so when I have a day planner, a physical day planner, because I have too many emails that go through at once, seeing
Mhm.
something physically in a calendar is always helpful for me. And that's just, that's my older generation looking at that, just easier. And I'm just starting to just make little ticks and X's about events that are coming up that I'd be working that are postponed or canceled. And then soon the entire calendar was just wiped. And we would, some friends of mine in the business would do these Zooms that they would last for like 3 or 4 hours. And I'm like, I can't. It was so depressing because nobody knew if anyone, how people were getting sick, what was happening. We were afraid to just go outside. Nobody knew anything. And that was the scary part. There was no plan, there was no anything. And so let's see, that was March 12th, 13th. And I ended up lasting in my apartment for like 20 something odd days before I'm like, I can't be here anymore. I packed up a bag with a bunch of leggings, a bunch of stuff, and I drove down to Florida. My parents have a place in West Palm that my mom goes down during the season because we all my entire family travels. So
Mhm.
during the season, she goes down just to be next to the beach with the dogs and the bird. And I said, Mom, I'm coming down. I have to get out of here. I just can't do nothing all day. That's just not. It's nice to take the break, but then then you get like stir crazy, and I needed to do something. And then I get a phone call once I get down to Florida, that they're putting people into the NBA bubble. They said, "Would you be interested?" And I said, "Well, I have nothing else to do, and I would really like some money right now, all considering." And I knew about it a week in advance, and I got an opportunity to get into the bubble, and I was there for 94 days in lockdown in Orlando, and that was just a whole nother experience too. It was, you go from 4 months of nothing to 7 games a day. That was a lot. That was something mentally that's just, that'll be an experience that we all will never forget for sure. But I'm so grateful that I got that opportunity because that was quite literally the only gig in town. Um, and we just knew that, using our skills and all the stuff that we knew, we had no resources. We couldn't go anywhere or do anything, but using the creative minds of what, we all had experienced before, it was all right. Well, let's just try to make this the best that we can with what we have. And we ended up producing something really great. I still think that we got robbed of that Emmy that year, but because we really put on something that was like unbelievable. And looking back on it again, really grateful that I got a chance to do it.
Hey, can you kind of elaborate on that experience down there? Because again, you're sitting there, you can't go anywhere, but again, there's things to do seemingly, but then there's also the fact that you guys are having to produce all these games. So it's not like it's one game, then go sit by the pool in the Florida sun. There might be a chance to do that, but you've got to work the entire time. I mean, obviously you're grateful for it, but is there any stories that kind of typify your experience in the bubble?
Well, it's funny. I was working with the league. I was working with NBA, and so that was something different because ESPN was there and Turner was there, and they had their own set of rules with the networks. But being with the league, we were the ones that were having to set the example. So we were on the operations team setting all the COVID testing at the hotel. We were doing all the catering check-ins, and Doug Holmes, who is a director at ESPN. He produces and directs hockey. Every time I see him now, he calls me Roy Kent because he's like, "You're always everywhere. You're here, there, you're everywhere." And every time I saw you in the bubble, you were doing COVID testing, then you were doing catering, then you were here, then you were checking people in here. You were doing all these roles. And I think for sanity purposes, that was the only way, like sitting in a room, not being able to see anyone. I didn't want to watch the news. I definitely didn't want to watch highlights because I've been watching 7 games a day. That's the last thing I want to be doing. But it's not like I'm going to be watching Hallmark movies. It just wasn't that mindset at the time. So being busy and active kept my mind off of ultimately sitting and thinking for too long. I knew mentally I didn't want to do that. And that's kind of how I've learned to cope with things in general, is just kept keeping busy with stuff. And that I definitely kept busy during the bubble for sure. And I learned different roles, that I might not have had been exposed to before, just because there was nobody else to do it. So that was something that was an experience that I'll, never forget.
Pam, it's interesting. You've done so much in sports, but now you've kind of, I won't say transitioned back, but you do a lot of stuff that's non-sports in a sense. There's some of it has sporting ties. You do Westminster Dog Show. You've done that. You've done a lot of the Kennedy Center honors type things. I assume you like doing that. Is it kind of cool to take your production and maybe get back into some of the things that you originally loved in that theater or those type of performance or awardish show type things?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Because at the end of the day, live events are live events, right? There's always, something to prepare or get ready for. Award shows have been really, really cool for me because again, those are all done live. You have the very similar aspects. The instead of a game, you have a show. There's an intermission or halftime or something like that. What's been cool about the entertainment side is, you have to dress up a little bit more for an event like the Kennedy Center Honors. We're all in black tie for show day. And that's something different that I don't necessarily have to deal with, doing something like the dog show. But you still, always for a game day, you want to look nice, dress nicer. But those entertainment shows are a little bit different. And when you're dealing with award shows on the musical side, that's just something that is kind of, a different experience that I just like doing that just because it's fun. I enjoy it. I recently got to do an award show and then a pageant in Puerto Rico. I did Miss World over there in Puerto Rico. And that was something that was completely different from anything else I've dealt with. But then you're not dealing, with 18-year-old collegiate athletes. You're dealing with 18-year-old beauty queens. So it's a different type of ego.
Well, you dealt with that at Tennessee though before, right?
Exactly. So, but it's just a different style of how you're producing events. And at the end of the day, you still want things to happen on time. There's still a schedule. You still have your crew to feed or get to in certain positions. You've got, all those different elements that are required of an event like that. And so it's nice to kind of branch away from sports from time to time. And that's always a lot of fun.
Pam, you've also gotten into teaching over the last 5 years or so. And it's interesting. I did catch a clip of you talking about this. And I almost, in a sense, kind of likened you to a bit of a drill instructor in the fact that you're kind of breaking the kids down a little bit in the sense of getting, and I won't say killing their dreams, but you're making their dreams maybe more realistic in the sense of, look, this isn't sunshine and lollipops. It's fun, but it's a lot of work. Kind of tell me about your mindset as a teacher and also how did you end up teaching at Alabama when you were a Tennessee girl? I thought that was verboten.
Yeah. So a good friend of mine who was the drum major at Tennessee started this program at University of Alabama, and an opportunity came up and he was looking for adjunct professors because there really wasn't any sports specific focused outside sports management classes that he wanted to kind of bring to University of Alabama, but he wanted somebody who was in the business to teach. And I knew I didn't want to do it full time because I had a career that I was building. But the opportunity came about, and I said the only way I can really do this is if it's online, where I don't have to be physically there. And looking at certain curriculums, it took about a year to build out this class, and it's a sports event and marketing promotions class that I teach. And it kind of sets this, I don't know about, drill sergeant necessarily, but it does give a realistic mindset to kids who want to work in the business in some facet, with a realization that, you're not going to necessarily get off for Christmas or Thanksgiving. That's just a reality of what it is. If you want to work, in, the NBA, say goodbye to your Christmases if you want to spend, 2 weeks with your family without doing anything. It's just not, you want to work, in college basketball. Easter is falls on, Final Four follows usually on around Easter weekend. So there's always events going on. If you want to work in the NFL, Thanksgiving is really an important week and weekend for games. So if you want to work games physically on site or in person or travel, it's the understanding that, what you are doing right now might not be how you need to curve your education aspect of it. And I one of my favorite parts about the midterm that I give is an event audit where I have them pick any sport or any music a venue or any place like that, and you're auditing the facilities venue itself, where you're going in and you're looking at, oh, I've never noticed this before, but now I'm having to, from a marketing perspective, look at these things. How you're going to get butts and seats. How you're doing it as a fan, and how you show up with parking, with concessions. Is it taking a long time? How would you change it to make a better experience for, the consumer? And when you're working in sports versus going to a game, you pick up on certain things, right? Like, and I know when you go into a venue, you're like, oh man, parking was terrible today because it took X number of minutes to get in, and you have your ticket, you have to get validated. And, when you're going to an event that is easy, right? You're like, oh man, that was so nice. And I got out of there in 15 minutes and there was 15 bars down the street where we can go and have a cocktail after. And you remember those experiences because you've been to different venues over time. And that's kind of what I'm trying to instill in these kids, is that, learning behind the scenes and learning about other departments. If you're working in PR, you really need to learn about facilities management. You need to know about more in-depth information about the organizations and the teams and the clients that you're working for. And some say that I have like ruined it, where they can't go into an event and not think, about the concessions, or think about, I can't not see the little arrow in the FedEx logo anymore without pointing that out. That's the first thing that I see now. And so I like being able to not ruin it necessarily, but bring a different perspective that they might not have seen before. And then I think that's really important in education and learning and moving forward and being in this business.
Pam, I think I've heard you say before that in your path as a woman in this business, it's not easy, but I think you've said it haven't been some of the huge major headaches that maybe some others have talked about. When you kind of come into this as a trailblazer like you are, how proud are you that what you've been able to do in this business as a woman?
Oh, I'm really grateful that I'm surrounded by other women as well. Is like we try to really support each other, and garnish new opportunities, and if make sure that people in this business are really supported. I'm grateful for it. I'm glad to be breaking those barriers and breaking those glass ceilings, because we can do it too. And I know a lot of great people out there that are starting to do their own pioneering and doing all that stuff. And I have a great friend that just started as an engineer for Game Creek, that she's one of the few women that are doing it because she's just really, really good at it. And it's not necessarily about, the gender power, or we have to make sure that women are in these positions, or just make sure that they're really, the person that's getting that position is really good at what they do, regardless of being a woman. But it has been, more difficult. You do have to kind of prove yourself, I feel like, a little bit more even now, being this position. And I always like to say, I said, come try it. You want to do it? Come on and see what we really do. Let's see if you can handle it. There's just a lot of people in certain roles that don't want that responsibility, and that's okay. And I always like to say, take a gander in our shoes and see what we have to deal with. And usually they'll either be like, all right, I get it. I see it. I'm all right. I don't want to deal with those things that you deal with. And again, it takes a certain type of person. It's a certain lifestyle that we deal with, whether you're a female or a male in this business. And there's just, there's a lot of great females out there, and it's really nice to be in the little club supporting one another.
Well, you're definitely one of them, Pam. Before we go, I have to make sure you see this. I think you
Oh
can,
yeah.
but this This little guy sits behind me on all these shows I do. I feel like if I got your dad over my shoulder looking at me, I have to do a good job because I
There you go.
disappoint him.
Same all the time.
Pam Chvotkin, of course, do so much production work, so much you're doing. Thank you so much for joining Huber and Friends. We really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.